So, Lee, what first inspired you about the possibility of this series? What's the kind of origin story of the Scheingold Poetry and Poetics Lecture series?
Well, after my husband Stuart, who was a political scientist at UW, died in 2010, I went to be with my mother in Arizona, who then died a few months later. And then I sort of developed this thing where I felt like I had to be with poetry. I don't exactly know why. That wasn't necessarily my vocation or anything, but I felt that it had to be Russian poetry, which goes deep into my history because I was an undergraduate in Russian language and literature. I got in touch with James West, who was teaching a seminar in Russian poetry just as I was coming back to Seattle. And I was just full of emotion. And he, I felt after I sent the email off, I didn't know about any senior access program or anything. I sent the email off, I felt that I would die if he didn't let me into the seminar. And of course, he happily let me into the seminar. And I knew I could get it because I can read Russian. I don't speak it very well or hear it very well. Anyway, so that sort of started off with poetry, my being very involved again with poetry. The seminar was great. I read a lot of Russian poetry on my own that summer. And
what year was all this?
Stuart died in 2010. That seminar was in 2011. And the reason I had gone to the university was I went with some friends to get our tarot cards read. And the person, I knew the person a little bit who was reading them, and I don't know anything about that kind of stuff. But so we talked and talked and talked. And finally she said, well, okay, I think we're done now. She said, the main thing is that you go to the university to get what you need, because I have the feeling that's a very nourishing place. And I hadn't even mentioned anything really about doing that. So yeah.
What were some of the theory threads that were present when you started thinking about starting up or supporting this type of series where we bring other people in to talk about poetry and poetics?
Well, I do, in terms of starting this lecture series, I didn't really think, oh boy, let's have a lecture series. I felt, oh boy, I want to give a lot of money to the English department because I love what they're doing. So, and I had taken it, although I had taken poetry classes from everybody, from Charles Laporte and Brian and Jeff Knight, who was the one who had the idea, why don't we do a named lecture series, which I didn't even know what he was talking about. And I didn't want to do that, although there was already a Scheingold, you call it, not a professorship, but anyway, faculty thing that Stuart and I had done for the political science department. So what did I think? I was thinking, when Jeff said that, that's what got me started thinking about this. I did feel somehow the way this was going to go was that I wasn't going to have much to do with the selection, nor did I necessarily want to, but that I definitely wanted to give this money. And the first year, what's her name? Stephanie Burt came, and that was fabulous. I liked the way that worked. But then I did get more and more involved with, the people who were on the committee, and enjoyed hearing them talk about what to do. And I think that it was just a very strong feeling of, as I got to know faculty members, wanting to support them. It probably was a little bit involved with my feeling I hadn't supported Stu enough, or as I said to someone shortly after he died, I've got love left over here. I need to know what to do. I'm going to have to figure out what to do with it. And it was more that feeling, just to sort of, and I called various faculty people and various deans, had lunch with each person. And I realized now I was thinking about my lunch with Bob Stacy, and my feeling of such warm curiosity about who he was and how he'd felt about becoming a dean and giving up his research and scholarship and teaching. I just wanted to know all about that. And I know that had to do with Stu as well, or at the very least, knowing what these people were thinking or, going through.
And when did you start writing One Silken Thread?
Well, I don't even exactly remember. I think it was probably about, I think it was 2011.
Okay.
And I didn't think, oh, I'm going to write a book. Although I had become involved with a publisher at Tulane who was, as Stuart was dying, wanted to reprint several of his books. So
Hmm.
Stu signed for that, 3 or 4 of his books. And so, of course, I had to, talk with the editor back and forth and the publisher. And some point I said to the editor, don't you need an editor to work on this? He said, yeah, but I don't have anybody. So I said, I will be happy to edit Stuart's books. So I did. And then I said, I would be happy to edit other books. So we sort of got involved in this thing, and I love proofreading and editing. So anyway, during the first 4 years after Stuart died, I went to his annual meeting, which was the Law and Society meeting. And it was in various places. One year it was here, another year it was in Hawaii. And so at that meeting, I sat with the publisher at the table in the book exhibit. So that sort of got me even more involved. When I was reading all the poetry, both in Russian and in English, I wasn't thinking, oh, I got to write a book about this, or even very much that I wanted to write about it. But
Yeah.
I did. I loved it.
Were you writing the kind of prose in classes or just kind of like on your own, on the side?
Both.
Yeah.
But in any case, it was about poetry, and that was good. So I wrote some things. I don't know. I've always written things, articles, and
Yeah. You're extensively published in your field, actually. I noticed on your CV. Like
yeah.
you're comfortable with writing.
Oh, very, very. In fact, some friends of mine in Kansas, I was visiting them, and on the bedside table, I noticed was a letter from me in the year they went there, 1980, 80 or 81. And this letter was written out in a very nice hand, which I don't have anymore. But anyway, I wrote this letter, and it was like, I hate to use this word because it sounds like Trump. It was perfect. The letter was sort of perfect. It just sort of flowed
Yeah.
and ended at the bottom of the last page. And I thought, boy, how did I do that? But anyway, at some point I started writing. I guess the first thing I wrote was the first chapter, which was on Russian
Yeah.
poetry and
Yeah.
Greek. And once I got that done, then the other ones just sort of flowed.
Yeah.
And I suppose it must have been in 2013 that I just spent a great deal of time in Suzzalo and in the undergraduate library, and very early in the morning. And I just was writing and looking, and it's a time I don't remember very well, which is kind of odd. And
Oh, interesting.
I was thinking about that today and why that was. And I guess, you said you were going to ask me some things about the history of this, and my mind was just sort of blank. And I realized that they were episodes, and once I got them into the book, I didn't think about them very much after that. Although, of course, I always continued with poetry. The other day I'm taking a seminar in Germanics right now, graduate seminar. And so it's on Zoom, of course, and there are 12 or 13 of us in there. And the other day, I can't think in connection with what, but I sort of stood up, even though you can't stand up in Zoom. And I said, I just want to say that when Stuart died, the day or two before his death, I just came home and I couldn't sit down and I couldn't lie down. I just was pacing across the living room, and I was saying to myself, I was saying out loud, I can't believe I'm losing my Stu. I can't believe I'm losing my Stu, just over and over and over. And what I told the class was, on that day in class, I suddenly realized that statement, which had come along with me all these years, had 2 parts to it. All I thought about was, I'm losing my Stu. And then I was talking about, I thought, oh, what does I can't believe mean?
Yeah.
And, I think I couldn't believe in death. I couldn't believe in death for me or for my people that I loved.
It's
Right.
interesting you talk about not remembering the time very well. I have pulled up, this is probably gonna be awkward to listen to, right? But you wrote, it can be far less scary to be accompanied by poems than by people. We don't have to worry about the poem being inattentive, judgmental, preoccupied, or overburdened by our needs. And I think that maybe there's something about when you really are immersing yourself in kind of poetry world thinking and feeling, it's a little bit difficult to step out and see it as like a cohesive sequence, right?
Yes.
Or to remember other pieces about it. It's
Although
almost
I
like
think
the,
we need cohesive sequences in
okay,
our
say more.
lives.
Why?
So that was somehow that's where I was with that. I had a recent experience of illness, not COVID, and as time went by, I realized I didn't have the words. I I didn't have the words for what was going on with me, and I wrote something down, and it was about an illness episode. And even with just those two words, that I had an illness episode, and that's when I realized, and this is true now, I don't know if it was true then, but I need some kind of theoretical thread holding my life together. And I didn't have it for this episode. And what happens is events come along and they outpace the theory. And so, my theory is then just kind of threadbare and not available to me,
Yeah.
you know, and even just with the phrase illness episodes, which Jesse Oak Taylor gave to me, I felt better, less anxious, less
Yeah.
worried, more
Yeah.
cohesive over time. That's
Hmm.
for sure.
What was Stu's experience in academia?
He did a tremendous amount of research and writing.
Yeah.
His field was law and politics, and he and another colleague wrote a lot about left-wing lawyers, about cause lawyers, as they call them. So I did, in the course of our 42 years together, read everything that he'd written. So the connection is the academic one, just the learning and teaching and what academia is all about. And really, that was his life. And he finished his last
Yeah.
book on political novel a day before he died, 2 days before he died. I mean, it was published, sorry. It wasn't that he
Yeah.
finished, it was published.
Yeah.
So that was pretty powerful, and I just feel such a draw to the university. Those first few people whom I didn't know at all, but just called up and said, "I want to take you to lunch." I read everything they had written, and so I remember having lunch with Jesse Oak
Yeah.
Taylor and telling him I'd read everything. And no matter what we were talking about, he just kept saying, "I can't believe you read everything I wrote. I just can't believe it."
But
Not
I mean,
sure.
I think it speaks to like something I appreciate about you that I've noticed is that you're very curious about what makes people who they are on every level, and that includes their academic writing, right?
Oh yeah,
I think sometimes something I actually think is really cool about the series too is that like it really asks scholars and practitioners to show up as their full selves and kind of bring in what they think and feel about poetry as much as what they've published and had to say about it. But it's not an either or, right? It's very much both.
yeah,
I
and I
didn't
think
know
that
that. I
was
didn't, yeah.
true from the beginning, and certainly was true of the one that Ray Paris set up. I mean, it was great. The project of the English department, the project of the humanities, the project of the Nobel Prize course, and all these other things that are going on. Just how much I am interested in, and then once I find out more, I believe in that this is a very good thing to be doing. So it's
Yeah.
it's easy for me then. Really, it's easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
What, what, I'm gonna ask a banal question that I think is actually one I can envision people getting caught on, which is I want to know like why do you believe it's a good thing? Right? Like it's a banal question because everyone always asks, what's the value of the humanities, right? I'm not saying like you don't have to wax poetic, pun intended, about the value of the humanities per se, but like when you talk about beliefs that like get fulfilled, right? When you interact with the people and the texts, Like, what about it to you is like, this is so good, I want to make sure I'm supporting it being
Well,
even more in the world, you know?
yeah, yeah. And in my first couple of years after Stu died, I used to have graduate students over. So I had these graduate students and one undergraduate over. And this is the story that I tell at the beginning of every, when I introduce the poets at the Poetry
Yeah.
Lecture series. And we got very drunk this one particular night. And this one undergraduate who was in the Jackson School said to me, we were sort of off by ourselves, and he said, so what do you do what's your creative outlet? I didn't know. And I was kind of drunk. And they said, well, I mean, do you write or do you, he didn't ask me about writing. He asked me if I sang or, painted pictures. And, I got tired of saying, no, no, I don't do that. And then I sort of whirled on this poor boy and said, all I know is words and loving people, which was not a sentence that I planned to say in any, and that has held up. That has held up as a purpose for my life and just what my love is all about, the things
Yeah.
I do about that. And I had the thought, as anybody psychoanalytic would, well, the words are just a defense and it's the loving people. That's the most important thing. The words are not just a defense. The words
Yeah, I
are,
don't think so.
yeah, they're, and I've learned that over the years. And what hooks me into things is, emotion. And I was thinking about Merrick Garland and how he kind of brought some very, very serious emotion about his life. He looked absolutely comfortable. He was obviously on the verge of tears, but he just talked right on. And somebody said, oh, the feeling in that room, that's what I want, the feeling in that room. And I think I've known this for a long time, a lot longer than I've been doing something about it, which is what gives me a lot of energy to do it now. And that is, as I finished my job at Group Health, and Stuart and I were going on sabbatical, and so I had been there 10 or 12 years teaching these residents, family medicine residents. And there was a final graduation dinner, as there was every year. So I went to that, and the residents gave me a teaching award there that I was extremely pleased about. And so I went up there to accept it. And all of those specialists, the orthopedists, the surgeons, everybody, they stood up to clap for me. And even at that time, I thought, they know I love them. They know I have loved them. And that's what they're clapping for. I was glad I thought of that. I wish I'd paid more attention to it at that time.
I don't think people associate research and academic theory and academic talks and talks that bring together the humanities at large with theory as a place that is driven by love or that can create the sense of love and what words have to do with it. You know what I mean? So my sense is words is the important piece there for kind of bringing those together.
Uh-huh.
Would you be willing to talk a little more about what you mean about the words being just as important as the love, or kind of the way I hear it is like words as are part of the vehicle for kind of creating different like loving affects and like loving capacities between folks, right?
Well, I was looking at, people would say to me when the book came out, oh, that's so great. It must be so cathartic for you writing that, your grief. And neither of those words meant much of anything to me. But, there's this book by Max Porter called Grief is the Theme of Feathers. And so he wrote, grieving is someone talking to somebody who's grieving. Grieving is something you're still doing. It is everything. It is the fabric of selfhood and beautifully chaotic. It shares mathematical characteristics with many natural forms. It's just, I think more and more people are willing a little bit to talk about the love part. How is love in words? Wow.
Well, I'm wondering if like this adds in the other layer of grief, maybe being even inseparable, right, from love and words in some way. I'm going to posit a theory,
Oh, good.
which is
I love that.
people might be more willing to discuss what love has to do with it, to be cliche, because there's such a more visibilized scale of grieving happening right now, right? Like there's so
Point.
much grief
Yeah,
that's like on the surface, and people are looking for some other forms of feelings to keep them connected and rooted to what is here, but also what's not anymore,
that's
right?
really good, isn't it? I mean, it's a great thing. I think that's right. And I think it's really, yeah.
Maybe.
It reminds me of, you know, the state of mind or the state of feeling that some poems have. And I meet every month with a family doctor, my old friends from the 80s. And each
Yeah.
time we read 4 or 5 poems before we come together. And, you know,
Oh,
we've had
amazing.
different ways of talking about them or thinking about them. Um, but what we now do is one of us reads the poem aloud. And when that's done, then we are liable to just sit there and say, wow, that's beautiful. Or that one doesn't really speak to me. But just, oh, those words there, those 2 or 3 words, aren't they just wonderful? I think we both admire the poets a great deal and admire someone who can say that like that.
Right?
Yeah,
So I was partly curious about your relationship between like psychoanalytic work and poetry, because I think that like in theory they can sometimes seem antithetical to each other, if that makes sense. Like one seems to kind of constantly escape um, a category, if that makes sense, or like meaning. But I realize that might just be that I don't understand psychoanalytic work enough to see where they coalesce, if that makes
well, I think
sense.
there's a lot of confusion in psychoanalytic work. You have to
Okay.
tolerate a great deal of not knowing. And I think that's very good for me.
Yeah,
And
that
I
makes
think
sense.
that, I don't know what made me think of this at the time you were just talking, but growing old is really great for wisdom. It really does, you know,
Yeah.
and I like my position on campus, knowing so many younger people, faculty and students. And I just, I don't think it's entirely that I like feeling superior, which I don't really. I don't like it. No, I mean, I don't, I'm not superior. um, I think the person who, you know, the person in 2010 is not the person in 2021. This particular 11 years makes a great deal of difference, in part because the emotional challenges have been so great. And it's not that I sit around and think about them, but I saw something the other day that said, pose the question, live the answer. It's probably real, you know. And that's what I feel like I've been doing.
Hmm.
And it doesn't make any sense as I used to do, which is pose the question, get that damn answer yourself, no matter what
Yeah,
you
yeah.
have to do to find that answer and get it and make it
Yeah.
understandable and brief. And no, you know, I live in this retirement apartment now, and everybody I know is, if anything, older than me. And it's just a way of living where you know that that which is ahead of you is less than that which is behind you. And that's okay, because I certainly wouldn't want to think I had to live through 76 more years now. But it's whatever, oh, you know, you were saying something about whatever you might read novels later. There is no later. There is no later. And when somebody in a restaurant says, enjoy the rest of your evening, I say, what? Was my evening. It's over, man. Nothing's gonna happen. This,
Do you actually say that?
oh, sure, I say that. These are young people. They need to
What
hear
did they
that.
do?
That's,
What did they
that's
do?
what happened to the aggressive side of me. I will say anything to anybody, pretty much. I mean, I find that
Yeah.
I have, you know, enough feeling for people that I don't say unpleasant things that they won't like. But yeah, I just,
Yeah.
that's part of my love
Yeah.
for people. Yeah. You know, part of how those doctors knew that I loved them is a lot of what I did was saying to this guy, did you know this guy over here is doing this other thing? It's really cool. And, you know, here's how you could do that. Or even with professors, you know, I was, you know, so-and-so I noticed does this, you know, right now I have something that John Webster has written about Zoom and whether or not you have your picture on there. And I'm going to just copy that and give it to everybody else
Yeah.
that I know, because I think that people who are in a professional group often don't have a chance to know each other at all because they're working the whole time. It is what I said about the sort of the more general humanities discourse. Turns out I find most of it very, very interesting because I haven't heard
Yeah.
it before. And that's what makes me, what can I give? I think it's a good thing that I don't know what's coming and that I trust the English department to do something good with it.
Yeah.
That gives me a
Yeah.
good feeling.